Hello, I'm Bob the Bookerer, and I am joined today by...
Sina, hi.
Hello.
I'm from Beating Around the Books.
And today we have been doing a buddy read of a certain book, which Sina's going to tell us about in just a moment. And it is from one of BookTube's very own, Marc Nash. And we thought, we'd had a really good time sort of talking about the book and reading the book together. And so now here are our kind of vaguely assembled thoughts on that book. So Sina, what is this book about?
Very vaguely assembled. Okay, well, so the book in question is Three Dreams in the Key of G, which is, when was this published? Was it 2018, I think?
Mm-hmm. I think around then.
Which I think is his fifth or fourth novel, I can't remember now. And I'm not sure why I got the honor of trying to explain what it is about, but let's try, okay? So it's a novel told in three different strands, which the title already gives a hint at. We have three different voices. They are both all kind of female. So let me explain. So the first voice we hear is a mother who lives in Ulster, still during the times of the Troubles, although it kind of goes over to after the, what's it called? Good Friday Agreement, I think.
Yes.
Anyway, so this is a mother of two young children. She has a husband who is completely useless, both as a father and a partner, and she writes a diary. The diary entries are all not in chronological order, but sort of mixed through, which is slightly disorienting in the beginning. And they are interestingly dated in Roman numerals, which, yeah, we can get into later. And I had to kind of dust off my knowledge of how to read that again. And I felt very embarrassed as a history student. I was like, well, how does that? Oh, yeah, okay. Anyway, so that's one voice. Then we have another voice, which is the crone, I guess, the mother of the crone, which is an older woman. She's British, but she lives in the US, and she runs a, how do you say this? Refuge for women from abusive relationships. I don't know what it is, but do you call that women's shelter or something?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
Shelter.
And she writes, I think, is it blog posts? It's some, yeah, blog posts or, online entries. Yeah, I'm guessing it's a blog post. But somehow, because of her name, she at first alludes, lots of institutions like the FBI and the CIA and so on have their eyes on them because they think that it might have to do with, they might be some sort of terrorism organization, which sounds ludicrous. But we later find out that she has some very odd motives that may have to do with, the interest of these institutions. Organizations, I don't know. Anyway, that's the second voice. And the third voice is the one that intrigued me the most and sounds ridiculous when you hear about it. It's the genome speaking to you. So it's in the voice, it's like almost as choral voices of the four bases that make up the DNA. So we have G, C, A, and T. And sometimes I feel like they have a slightly different tone, but on the whole, the tone is very irreverent. And the genome is very angry at humanity and human scientists for trying to map it. So it feels kind of violated in a sense, and it's kind of talking back. I'm not sure through what. Is it through the computers that are analyzing the base sequence? And it's kind of mocking humanity for its sort of for its hubris, I guess, of trying to analyze the mysteries that are still there within, well, I guess within life and evolution and maybe human illnesses and aging and stuff like that. So that's the very rough idea of what this is about. Sorry, this took way too long, didn't it?
that is a much better description than I could muster, because I think every time I've sort of tried explaining a bit about what the book is about, it's quite hard to pin down, I think, kind of intentionally. And so I think actually, yeah, exactly that like those three characters, and right from the beginning we kind of get this sort of idea of the kind of jokey sort of, or the playful kind of nature around that, because all of them are called genome in some way. We have
I failed to mention that, the
genome itself, and the two women who are mentioned are both called Jean Ohm in some way. Ohm as a surname, one with OHM, and I think the other one OME, I want to say. And yeah, so right from the beginning, I have to admit as well, I had a brief moment at the beginning where I kind of merged some of the voices. So a little bit later was like, oh, okay, Bob, you're being an idiot. There are actually several characters. I was sort of reading somehow all of them as like this weird mishmash of everything. But actually, like you said, they are really distinct voices once you sort of really get the sort of breakout bits of them and kind of come to understand what's going on with it. But yeah, I mean, on the surface, like you said, that is quite a balmy like idea. Like, I mean, firstly, like, what is, like, I love Marc Nash's brain is sort of like, yes, these things are going to connect, and actually they do. I don't know how he does it.
Interesting mind, isn't it?
Yeah, but like, I don't know how he does it, because on paper, like, that sounds ludicrous, and like that should absolutely not work. But it really comes together in some quite interesting and profound ways that we're going to talk a bit about. I should say at this point, we will be going a bit into spoiler territory a bit later, but we're going to announce sort of when we do so. But exactly kind of from that, we have those three, these three characters who are all kind of interconnected and kind of each individually tell their stories. And especially when you put them again on paper, like those are three very different sort of things. But yeah, I mean, sort of generally, how did you find the book? So I'm really caught in the sun there. There we go. How did you find the book? Like, what were your kind of thoughts on it as you're reading it?
This is so difficult. This is also one of the thoughts I had. So it's really densely written. And so I'm not a native speaker, although I think my English is quite good, and I'm used to reading, you know, whatever you might deem difficult literature. But this is a different level in terms of the language used. So often I had to like stop and look up a word and look up another word and another one, and thinking, ooh, that's interesting. I need to remember that. Obviously, I've now probably forgotten 90% of it, if not more. But so that it doesn't make for an easy read, that's for sure. And also the sentence structure sometimes, or the way things are described, it's not easy. Let's put it that way. But there's also so much fun in there because there's so much wordplay, which I personally love. So he has this tendency to either I don't know, expand on an image and go further than what you would expect, and then sometimes you have, you know, he plays with different meanings of the same word that you might, well, I personally wouldn't even think of in that moment, but then, you know, like a paragraph later or at the end you go, well, that's fun, and you know, that sort of thing. But also he plays with, what's it called, idioms and stuff like that, which I personally really enjoyed. And then some of the ideas I found really interesting or funny, but I would probably be lying if I said I understood everything.
No, I mean, especially, I mean, I think it's really interesting that you say that, because sort of my introduction to Marc Nash on BookTube was, I did a video about experimental books, and then pretty much everyone was just like, you need to go and check out Marc Nash. Like, Marc Nash knows a lot about this. And then it's kind of really easy to see why reading this, because this book is very experimental. And like you said, there's a lot that I'm sure went over my head as well. But what I really love when an experimental book is done well, and I think this book is done really well on this, is where the experimentation is not only fun and sort of a pleasurable reading experience, but also if you dig a little bit further and kind of either kind of go into the world that is in the book. So I'm really caught in the sun. There we go. And if you really go into the world of the book and really kind of work with the book, then actually there's a lot of kind of quite rich stuff to be mined. And so there are definitely moments where I was like, I think I've just read that passage way too quickly. Let me go back. Let me take that passage slowly. And then I was like, oh, not only do I now get that bit, but also that's bloody clever. Like,
Yeah.
And so I think actually often my issue with some experimental books that I've read in the past has been, it's been kind of clever for clever's sake. Of kind of just like, wow, look at me, I'm doing all these really fun things. Like, so for example, like good bad examples. So Mark Z. Danielewski's House of Leaves, which I think you've read, right?
Yeah.
Yes. So
Loved
like
it.
I really love that book, although I did read it ages ago and I might hate it now, I don't know. But then I've read some other stuff by Mark Z. Danielewski where I'm like, now you're just being like obtuse and like this is really frustrating because there's a book of his called Only Revolutions?
No, I've heard of it, but I haven't got
Yeah.
it. I haven't read it.
So every 8 pages you're meant to turn the book over.
Oh,
Physically,
okay.
because like the top and bottom is like, you know, there's an inverted bit, but like, and it's meant to be every page is 360 degrees. So
Okay.
so like it's like 90 words per section over the 2 pages.
Mm-hmm.
With the idea that you then read, maybe 45. So 45 words, sorry. So when you read 8 pages, you've read 360 words and then you turn over again.
Mm-hmm.
Or something like that. And what was really frustrating about it is like, that's a really cool idea. And I really liked the concept of that, of like playing with a book and like really manipulating it. But then the bits that I'm going really off on a tangent here, but there is a point,
I like
which
tangents.
is the, I didn't care about anything that was in those 45 words.
Okay. Well, that's a
Like,
problem.
yeah, because I was like, actually, it was written because the whole idea as well is that there are 2 sort of stories being told in reverse. Like, one in forward time, one in reverse time.
Mm-hmm.
So at one point you meet in the middle and then you carry on with the book, which is kind of in theory a cool idea, right? But then like as a result,
Well, the
he had a
execution.
whole he had a whole thing of making the words be similar for each part, so that what you're reading at the end of one person's story is really similar to the words at the beginning of the other person's story, and like that goes on. But like that took so much work that like what was there on the page was meaningless.
So like high concept, but
Yeah, like you read each page and you're like, I don't know what it, like those 45 words are meaningless. Like just said like a few things
terrible. Okay.
and then been like, and then listed a few flowers, and it almost like grammatically didn't make sense because you wanted the letters to be the same between the 2 pages. So like just the whole thing. Anyway, all of that is to say that experimentation and cleverness for cleverness's sake doesn't always work, at least for me.
Yeah.
And what I really appreciated, like early on, I was a little bit nervous because like, oh, there are a lot of like quite complicated words, and it kind of begins with a sort of genome sort of structure thing, and I was like, what is going to go on here? Like I was really quite nervous about this book. And I was like, I'm buddy reading this, like am I going to be the person who's just like, what the hell is going on? And everyone else is like, this is so clever, this is so brilliant, and I'm just like, I don't understand, I am stupid. And actually instead I think this book works on sort of multiple levels, because I think you can read this book fairly lightly, I think, and still have kind of an enjoyable experience of the kind of wordplay.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you can also spend a lot of time with this book and have it slowly reveal itself to you as
Mm-hmm.
well. And I think depending on my state of mind at various parts of the book, there were probably some bits that I read a bit more lightly and other bits that I read a bit more in depth. And I think it gave something either way, for me at least. And yeah, I know that's sort of something we both sort of commented on quite a lot as we were going, and something you've already mentioned is the wordplay aspect of that. And we'll talk a little bit about some of that bit kind of post spoiler curtain as well. But like, did you want to sort of say just a little bit, about how the kind of wordplay worked for you, like what you kind of found in it?
Oh God, put me on the spot here.
Sorry. Here's the thing.
Wow. Okay. By the way, the experimental fiction video of yours was the first one I watched of yours. Possibly after watching Marc Nash about it or
I think
something.
it was. Yeah, because I think Mark mentioned it in his. Yeah, that was the thing actually. I did mine. Then Mark did his own video on experimental fiction. I blew mine out of the water, and I was like,
Yeah,
everyone just go and
well,
follow this one
yeah,
instead.
of course. Well, I also, the first one I watched of his, or the first one that where I was like, oh, I need to subscribe to this guy, was the one that he did on B.S. Johnson, which I had read some B.S. Johnson, loved it, and there's not that many people talking about him, so I found that, and I was like, ooh, this guy, okay. Anyway, yeah, and I commented on it. It was like 3 years old or something, and he answered, and I was delighted. Anyway, I'm sorry, more tangents. I'm trying to buy time. What do you mean? How does that work for me? I like wordplay, and he's much cleverer with language than anybody that I know otherwise.
Yeah.
Well, so I don't know. Should I just give you an example?
Sure. Yeah.
It's not really spoiler territory. So one that I said about the double meaning or multiple meanings of a word in the English language is relatively soon, like in the beginning. So we are listening to the mother who is talking about her baby's eyes, like a newborn's eyes development. And I don't know where to start here. Okay. Well, we've already forded the blank milky blue mists therein. And now, as the recondite cones and rods gradually cohere, I can see the pixelated pixie of myself captured in her iris. Nice. Remember, blah, 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 recondite cones and rods. And then at the end of the paragraph, she says, spare the rod and spoil the child indeed. I like that sort of thing. I don't know if other people do, but completely different meaning here, but it's sort of repeated and we go back to the same word again.
Yeah.
And the other one that I liked was should I say that as well?
Yeah, please.
It's just a little like a play on idioms, I guess. I don't know where it is, but I know it because it was so good. Also the mother talking, and she says something. She says, I am the mother of pearl before swine. And I don't know why, it makes me chuckle, this sort of thing. Yeah. I have way more, but these are the two that I just remembered now. But there's also a lot more wordplay where it's about, how do you say that? Is that a word, homophones?
Yeah.
I'm trying to grasp back to my very basic linguistic knowledge. You are better at that. Is that a homophones?
He kind of, yeah, I think, hang on, that one, I don't know, what would that count as actually?
Well, words that sound similar.
Yeah, it's a homophone in that sense, yeah.
Yeah.
Because I think that's the thing, it's so rich, and often we get kind of them sort of piles on top of each other, right? And again, I think this is sort of what we're sort of, saying about kind of a detailed reading of this book really yielding results, is sometimes you kind of go back and you realize, like you said with that one, that there's a callback to something earlier in the sentence or earlier on the same page or earlier in that kind of segment or chapter. And it sort of just nestled in there. And I think for me, when I sort of spotted those moments, and I'm sure there are many that I missed, but when I sort of spotted those moments, I was like, oh, this, I love it when authors do this, where you're like, you have clearly spent a lot of time editing and rewriting and thinking about this book, to the extent that you've kind of almost nestled little Easter eggs in bits that if I read that and I missed that bit, I would still, spare the rod and spoil the child still works on a sentence level. It still means something. But actually there's that extra little callback to the rods of the eyes and kind of being able to see, that just makes that a sort of really fun, rich experience. So I found this really quite joyful. And I'll admit there are definitely some times where I didn't know what was happening. I kind of didn't care. I was like, I'm sure there is a wider plot, but I'm definitely sure I missed some plot points at various bits. But the kind of playfulness, I was like, oh, this is really winning me over. Like, this is just fun to read. Like, yeah, there are many of the words as well. Lots of words that I read there, I was like, I don't really know what this means. But actually, I don't think it's necessarily the point. Like, I don't think I don't think I need to know what this word means, because actually I almost feel like this word has been chosen for the sound, or I feel like this word has been chosen for cadence, or something, or for a pun later in the paragraph. I don't think this word has necessarily always been chosen because of a very precise meaning. It was perhaps in some cases, and hopefully Mark will know, like we'll be able to kind of shed some light on that as well. But I'm kind of curious because actually, yeah, for some parts of it, for me, I found it really just fun. I was just really enjoying the reading experience of somebody sort of having fun with language, and that's what it's often about, right? You know,
Yeah.
this book, I think this is the thing, this book seems very serious on the sort of surface, and you know, particularly when you see that obviously it kind of involves a woman in Ulster during the Troubles, when it involves, you know, these other sort of subplots, it seems like a very serious kind of grandiose book, or like it might kind of go there. But I think actually what's really entertaining is, for all of those very serious themes, there are these really little sort of funny, snarky asides about something where it's just sort of like Mark is just having fun. I'm like, great, there we go. So yeah, I mean, before we go a little bit onto the spoiler aspect of this, because I do want to talk a little bit about how the kind of plot develops, particularly because I'm sure that there are bits that I've missed that you'll probably fill in.
I may have true.
But I think, yeah, I mean, how does this sort of compare to sort of other sort of experimental or kind of other books that you've read, and like how does it sort of, does it remind you of anything? Is there anything it sort of sits quite comfortably alongside for you?
I don't know. Does it? I think so. First of all, I think it's really difficult to compare experimental books with each other, because by the sheer definition of it, it's trying to do something new.
Right.
So then how, if this were to sit comfortably next to X amount of experimental books, then what is experimental about it any longer, right?
That's a very good point.
I mean, I can see, you know, certain things, like he's done only very few where he plays with positioning of the words on the page. Well, not very few. There's one passage where there's parallel text in 2 columns, but that's not what I mean. There's just maybe 2 or 3 other scenes where there's a bit more to the positioning of the words, which is something that, you know, I guess you could say, okay, this is something I have seen before,
right?
You know, this is not like
through defining examples, but for example, things like that, right? Like little sort of like words sort of bridging each other there, and then also this kind of dual text thing.
But it's not, it doesn't happen too often. This is not the main thing of the book, and it's not what makes it experimental, I would say. But what I mean is, this type of thing I've seen in other books. Like you've just explained, Marc Danielewski in House of Leaves does it much more, how do you say this, intensely. And, you know, also in House of Leaves, you sometimes have to do this one. But there, I feel like there's a point to it because it works within the story. And I think here there's also a point. So that's something where I guess, okay, that's not terribly innovative. Is that the word? No. You pronounce that differently, don't you?
I say innovative.
Innovative.
But like that's one of those ones.
No, I have these hang-ups about some English words that I always mispronounce. And I remember afterwards every time. Anyway, so I wouldn't say I have anything specific that I can say, oh yeah, this is like that. But I think that's already because of the notion of experimental or unconventional fiction, which I personally prefer the term, but
Nice.
What do you think?
No, you reminded me of this. Like, and I know that this is something that we messaged about at one point as we were reading. And I was just like, oh gosh, I haven't actually marked the page for this. I went to go and have a quick look. So one of the things that I found really entertaining was the letters, as you mentioned, Sina, kind of CG, A, and T that kind of feature a lot in this kind of genome idea. And at one point they are arranged on the page as an eye test, and this is something that I just thought was such a silly touch, and I loved it. I just thought it was so funny because sort of flicking through the page, and it's something quite serious being written on the page before, and very kind of intense sort of dense language, and then suddenly you get the CGAT letters as an eye test. And I was like, this is great. This is so like, at this point, I was just like, yeah, Mark, I think this is probably actually one of the tipping points for me of just sort of like how, like, I'm just sort of knowing how much fun Mark was having writing this. Just sort of like, yeah, there we go.
Speaking of Easter eggs, though, that
yes.
was the one thing that I was like super intent on doing, is trying to puzzle out a possible code in the different bases who get to speak. And I try to, you know, engage you and rope you in to my mission. It was like, first of all, you're looking for a puzzle where there may not be one. And second of all, now you're trying to, you know, solve it.
Right.
How silly is that? But I do think this is just one of those things, because I read so much, not so much, but I do enjoy the odd, you know, unconventional novel and stuff like that. And so Easter eggs are a thing that I love, especially if I actually notice them. So I'm like,
yeah,
I need to, you know, and I remember at the later part, yeah, I tried to like get at it again with you. It's like, oh, what about this? And why is it parallel here? And why is it, yeah. Maybe that's going too much into spoiler territory, but I was just obsessed with it.
No, I love that.
I felt like I was annoying you.
No, not at all. It did not annoy me in the slightest. I more just felt really stupid because I was like, I missed all of that. So I just have moments where I was like, that happened. Because, you know, I remember, and again with House of Leaves, I remember there being a moment where just after I finished it, I remember sort of seeing online, people had drawn out these whole sort of trees of knowledge of sort of, oh, okay, so actually you'll notice that on page 430, because that book also has a glossary and an index and like a table of contents. And in the index, there are things that are referenced that never come up. So, for example, it will say, I don't know, explosions, page 375. And you go to page 375 and there's nothing, at least sort of demonstrable, about explosions. And so, like, you know, I kind of took that as like a joke from Marc Danielewski of just sort of him playing with the idea of an index thing. But people online sort of drew up these whole things of being like, but actually, I think we can see this word as being about explosions. And I was like, I don't understand. I feel really stupid. I just thought it was fun. And actually, I think what's quite nice here is the puzzles of this book don't, like, they partly do feel like they're being done as a sort of a fun joke, but I think there is actually stuff to find in them. It's just that I don't think, maybe I was sort of both too stupid and too like quick with reading this book to to kind of look for them.
But the good thing is, I think also that you don't need them.
Yes.
To read and enjoy the book. It's just a fun little thing that I like to spend my time with.
Yeah.
I haven't quite figured it all out. I found another mystery that still puzzles me. But I think in your defense, so I used to study biology and I was very interested in genetics. So I think maybe it just struck me more when I saw the different bases and how they were paired.
Right.
You know, it just stuck out to me a lot quicker. You know what I mean?
Yeah, because I knew of those 4 letters, but I knew nothing else about them. So I was like, yes, those are 4 letters, and I know that they often stick together. I'm interested actually to hear kind of like, some of those.
Well, I think in terms of sort of grand topics, we have a huge part dedicated to the idea of the idea and the ideals, and also the difficulties of parenthood, or in this case, motherhood, because the father is useless. And then to me, it seems incredibly feminist. Well, there's also a lot of man-hating going on, but we're not talking, it's not just that, right?
Yeah.
It's not just like, you know, bra-burning, man-hating feminists. So that's one part, and I think relating to the parenthood part, we can then obviously tie that into, well, reproduction, and that then ties in with the genome part.
Yes.
You know, so in that way, it's all kind of related.
Yeah.
And that's what I found quite interesting.
No, definitely.
And actually, sorry.
No, go on. Sorry.
And actually, the moments about parenthood I found incredibly touching. Like, you know, for all the fun and games, and there were really some very, very touching moments in the way she describes her sort of not only her day-to-day thing, but also her ideas about it later on.
Yeah.
Anyway. So
no, definitely. Because I think that's a really important point, because I think at the beginning of the book, I kind of struggled to kind of be like, but why these three voices? You know, I couldn't kind of quite pin it down at first. And then some more of the parts about kind of motherhood and sort of parenting generally and kind of creation came up. And I was like, oh, this is really quite interesting, actually. And I think exactly like you said, like on the surface, I think this book kind of really kind of sends you, at least for me, sort of sent me through a real sort of range of assumptions, as in like I kind of started by thinking like this is going to be quite like, oh, this seems like it's going to be quite highbrow and difficult, and I was like, oh no, wait, this is really fun and playful, and then realized that there was this really profound and sort of quite moving aspect of kind of things going on as well in the book. And I just sort of thought, actually, this is really interesting to go from to have all of those sort of assumptions challenged, and maybe again that's sort of on me, but to then talk about parenthood in a really profound and moving way, and also a really silly way. I know that there's a scene that we'll link in this as well, but Mark has done a reading of a part of the book himself about gift bags.
Oh, that was
like
hilarious.
Like a kid's party, and it is genuinely on the page I was just like, this is hilarious.
It's so funny. So, and his reading is even better.
yeah, exactly, because it's, I think, like, and actually Mark's voice that he gives to it was sort of even better and funnier than the one I had in my own head for it. But it kind of looks at the kind of absolute absurdity that is sort of trying to create party bags for kids, and like the amount of effort and thinking and sort of negotiating and navigating social relationships and hierarchies and everything, just to create a little gift bag for a kid to take away and possibly like demolish. And I was like, this is so silly, and it comes after quite a few sort of quite harrowing and moving and dramatic parts, and it's just such a weird but brilliant piece of comic timing that it all kind of comes in. So yeah, I really enjoyed that about it.
Yeah, I was looking forward to that part because I had seen the reading before I read the book.
Oh, right.
So I was like, oh, finally we're at the party back, bitch.
Oh, so good. So good. Yeah. And I think with that, we are probably now skating on spoiler territory. Yes. So the spoiler curtain is about to drop. So yeah, if you do plan on reading the book, most of what we've said, I know it sounds like we've kind of covered quite a lot of ground that this doesn't spoil it, because weirdly, I think you kind of need to get into the rhythm of the book to realize why some of these bits that we've said might be vaguely relevant. But from here on out, we're going to talk a little bit more in spoiler territory. So please consider yourself warned. But yeah, I think the three plot lines converge in some sort of really quite interesting ways in this book. And you gave a bit of a summary earlier of what those were. The parenthood one is the one that we've just been talking about with the mother in Ulster, with the really useless husband. And I actually have to admit, I did enjoy how merciless she was at sort of berating this awful man, because it kind of does tie into actually a lot of discussions that I had quite a lot about the idea of the mental load, and the fact that this woman is having to manage every single aspect of this house and this family. You know, she's the one who's remembering birthdays, she's the one who's panicking about these bloody gift bags, she's the one who is having to kind of sort of like G up her husband and kind of get him to do anything. So much of what she's doing is just kind of going and going and going, and I don't think I realized how it was slowly seeping in. And then there was a sort of period at the book, sort of about maybe 150 pages in, where all of it really felt like it just sort of came together on that whole family bit. And I just found it really moving, just this idea of she is constantly worried about failing as a mother and about making mistake after mistake, and her kids hating her, and her husband being so chilled that she sort of is automatically like the bad guy. And and sort of feeling guilty for having thoughts of guilt about being a parent and doing it badly and all of these things. And I don't think I thought about it until actually something you were saying earlier, just about the idea of the genome itself, about this idea of creation, and actually how that kind of links back in, because this idea that she has kind of, she's been obviously like a big part of this creation, but she's still on a daily basis sort of replicating the routines and the actions that keep this family moving. Like she is the one adapting and mutating and, you know, kind of being the life force in this family while this man is useless. And I have to admit, I sometimes do find it quite funny in books where there are useless men. I for some reason find it really entertaining. I know I should feel like some kind of like, you know, like, no, like be better to men in books. I'm like,
men.
No. But like often I'm like, no, I'm with you. Like men are the worst.
There's a lot of useless men. Not all of them, but yeah.
But no. So what were your sort of thoughts on her and then her kind of storyline?
So, sorry. I'll just go into the useless men thing. I think, well, so I mean, it's a kind of, it's a bit of a platitude, isn't it? It was, oh, they're all useless and But, you know, I do think, of course, it ties into these patriarchal ideas of, you know, the one woman as the homemaker and the father as the breadwinner and stuff like that. And this guy here has completely, you know, swallowed that. He was in the paramilitary, so he's, you know, I guess the sort of epitome of what toxic masculinity looks like, you know, the sort of very, how do you say this? Somebody that's also, I guess, willing to commit violence. Kind of almost no wonder that he's so useless as a father.
Yeah.
I know that sounds, maybe that's too stereotypical, but I do think these things connect in terms of, you know, how you have to portray yourself and what kind of person you have to be to engage in that sort of thing. And
no, I agree. And I think I almost got confused at one point, because around the same time I was reading this book, I was reading Jennifer Johnston's Shadows on Your Skin, I think it's called, which is about Ireland. And there is also a man who was sort of paramilitary, who is decommissioned and is also kind of sort of rendered somewhat useless, as in like there's, whether it's sort of depression, whether it's not having a kind of a sense of focus, whether it's sort of trauma, it's never really, you know, it's kind of, all of those are sort of a bit open for so I think at one point I was sort of like, as I was reading this bit, I was like, am I getting that confused? Am I just sort of accidentally reading that bit in? But actually no, the parallel there is really interesting, because I think, exactly like you said, I think it's almost, maybe I'm reading too much into this, but maybe there's almost this element of, this is actually, you know, like the sort of classically masculine, you know, stereotypically masculine thing about kind of going to war and fighting and all of these things. We see how this sort of renders him sort of inactive, sort of somewhat useless within a family, and he's almost, his skill set almost only seems to be that, you know, that because of the sort of the national trauma, I suppose, is partly that it's created a whole set of men who are kind of being told and sort of conditioned that what they should be doing is fighting, and it's conditioned a whole set of women to kind of thinking that they have to hold everything else together while that's happening, and which, you know, is unrealistic for both sides. Like that does not help anybody. And so I found it really interesting that this man sort of is a little bit useless, because actually, like, this woman, you sort of, is almost quite visceral. Like you feel this sense of frustration bubbling up within her, and just sort of this sense of powerlessness that comes with always having to be in control. And I found it really quite touching in parts, because you really do sort of realize that, you know, she's almost resentful in quite a few ways, and sort of wants
for good reason.
Yeah, and you can see her wanting to step back, but she knows that if she steps back, there's nobody to fill that void. And she has to. And then when her children are sort of saying, you know, oh, I don't really like you, or like, you're unfair, you know, she takes it really personally, because she's almost, you know, you can hear her almost screaming to say, you don't know what I have to do for you. And
well, she sacrificed her own, you know, her own, how do you say this, dreams and ambitions. She's almost sort of subsumed by this mother role, And it only, you know, sort of rears its head, this little part that, you know, this very intelligent woman who's clearly, you know, how do you say this? I think she also seems, I mean, okay, we only see her side, but she seems like she's also much more intelligent than her husband, who's just, you know, not able to fulfill any of those needs, you know, intellectual needs. So I mean, I get that she's frustrated and she's so angry at her husband, but she's not only that, I think, because it already starts with the fact that she wanted to go to university and wasn't allowed to go to, and she didn't want to marry the guy. So, you know, patriarchy again. You know, but not only that, of course, because there was also this whole idea like, oh, how can we really send a young girl into the city, into Belfast? That's too dangerous, blah, blah, blah. And then, oh, let's just marry her off. You know, I understand that she's incredibly frustrated. And like you said, at the same time, she feels this incredible responsibility that she cannot step back. She needs to continue doing what she's doing because he's not going to pick up the pieces. And at one point, I can't remember, it was relatively late in the novel, I think, when I asked you, like, do you think she had postpartum depression? Because that's very much how it reads at some point. Not sure, I think it's after the birth of a second daughter, maybe?
Yes, I think that's right.
But but obviously then also doesn't get any help. And somehow, I don't know, claws herself out of that to an extent. So I don't know where I was going.
No, that's really interesting, because I thought it was, I think sort of it was only really about the midway, well, just over past the midway point of the book that I sort of started to really pull together, I think, a few of the threads, and then sort of you've got, you know, this genome being sort of feeling like completely out of control in terms of trying to hold everything together, and then you've got this other genome who we meet, who is seemingly a bit more in control, but there's almost this really, like, there's a lot more that's kind of going on behind it, where she is running this refuge, but then there are these interesting moments of, like, I mean, the man-hating bits come up again, which is, it was really funnily done, actually. I thought it was really funny, but it's sort of, again, comes at it from a different way, of this sort of physical and kind of psychic harm that is caused to women and women in society, and particularly how they then respond to it. And it's interesting, actually, because both women, I mean, I don't know if you sort of found this as well, but it's almost, you can see how other characters in the book treat both women like they're crazy. And I thought it was really interesting because, you know, one woman is treated as being crazy because she has these dreams and wants to pursue things, but is complaining about being a mother, like, how dare she? And the other woman is treated as crazy because she's doing other things to reach out and look after people and be this other kind of creator and sort of nurturing figure, but, like, obviously with some other things going on. And I just thought that was really interesting. Before we go
into it, since we're
absolutely.
Oh no, go on.
No, so I mean, because at times I was sort of worried that I'd missed parts of her story, but correct me if I'm wrong there, because I think you mentioned about the whole CIA thing earlier. Essentially, she is running this refuge, but she's being treated increasingly like she's running a sort of terrorist operation and this kind of terrorist cell network thing. And it's interesting how, again, her kind of decision to step back, you know, she is a woman in this book who is able to step back. But when she does, she is seen, well, part of the way that she steps back is then seen as being a threat, potentially, because it's like, well, why would she want to take these women away and look after them? Like, what's her end game? What's her agenda? And yeah, I don't know. What did you sort of think about her part? Because I found her, like, it took me a little bit to get into her bit, but then when I did, I'm like, oh, this is quite interesting. Like,
so weird. So yeah, but so at the beginning I was also like, how does this even work? Why? I think there's some sort of, she explains it with some mix up with her last name, and that last name brought her onto the radar of like CIA, FBI, and that she clearly has absolutely nothing to hide here. She's just looking after abused women, blah blah blah. And then later, you know, all of a sudden we get this other storyline where she tells us that she is kind of running some sort of breeding program in which she's trying to ultimately like be able to reproduce without men, I think, which obviously at the current time in the book is not possible, which is why she lets gay men stay in the refuge too, who and this is where I was just like, wow, okay, whose only thing, the only contribution they have to do is like, you know, mating with a woman once a year or something like that. No, I don't, that's actually not true. I don't think it's about mating. I think they literally just have to, you know, donate sperm, and then, you know, they do the whatever, IVF or something. Right. But it's so like, when you first read it, you're just like, wow, that is so ludicrous. What is going on, and how? What? But then you get the idea that, oh, maybe this is why she's on the radar of these organizations, and not because she's running a women's refuge. But then at some point, I also felt at a point I was like, how reliable is this narrator? How much of this is happening in her head? This is. You know, I just felt like I couldn't be sure, but I just went along for the ride anyway.
Yeah, and I thought it was really interesting with her parts, especially. I totally agree with what you're saying, because I think early in the book, we only really get her in sort of snatches of like a couple of pages or whatever. And there's this section where she almost gets to speak for herself a little bit more. And the same with the mother, actually. I think, and actually, on that note, sorry, the mother bit, I think there's a bit where the mother speaks for maybe 10, 15 pages or something. And she has almost this, not say stream of consciousness. It did actually remind me a tiny bit of Ulysses with, oh gosh, Molly Bloom at the end, where she gets a moment to speak for herself. But this sort of unbroken moment of like 10 or 15 pages of this mother just like unloading and progressing her thoughts, and it was really powerful because you could sort of hear this voice rising and kind of finding itself. And equally, there's a passage, I think, sort of towards a bit more towards the end, where the older woman running the shelter gets a chance to speak for herself a bit more. That's the bit when we find a little bit more out about her wanting to kind of have reproduction without men. But again, it's this kind of almost unchained moment where like she kind of breaks through and we hear her voice. And there's something I just thought it was so powerful to suddenly have, like, because the voices have been so sort of, you know, spread out, and, you know, they've been intermingled with the genome, like the code genome speaking. And then to suddenly have these voices break through and really kind of go, you're like, oh yes, like she's having her moment of just really being able to talk. And I just thought it was really interesting, because in that part, that's where we get that, and we get that insight, exactly like you said, and realize at the same time that she's maybe not the most reliable narrator. Like the mother feels like quite a reliable narrator. Like we just sense her frustration, and she's quite lucid and quite able to reflect on her own thoughts and kind of why she's having them. But this other woman, we sort of almost a bit like, oh, actually, it's kind of like you said, the kind of questions that left a bit unanswered there of, is this why the CIA is after you? But also, you kind of partly sort of like we're not often given the voices of women like that in books, I don't think, who actually reminded me a tiny bit of sorry, I realize I'm just sort of like just dropping random books in this now, but like Jordan Tannahill's The Listeners, that came out this year. I think it's only recently come out, but I read an advanced copy. So for me, this book has been around forever, but I realize that's only because I read the advanced copy. But in there, there's a woman who hears a humming sound, and slowly everyone around her thinks she's going mad because only she hears it. But then she meets another community of people who also hear it. And it's this kind of like groupthink, paranoia, like very kind of a very, very 2020, 2021 book of like, no, we understand what's happening, don't trust them, you know, like this kind of in-group, out-group thing. And there was a little bit of this woman, the woman running the shelter, that reminded me of that, in the sense of this woman who you can almost see that she's sort of finally found kind of a sense of calling or purpose, and she feels really rooted in this kind of community and this thing that she's grown. But equally, there are these sort of opposing forces kind of saying, you're crazy, you're a terrorist, you're whatever. And like, potentially there is like a threat of danger, we don't actually know, but also we're also meant to see her, I think, in some ways as being somewhat, not necessarily harmless, is not the right word, but kind of having good intentions.
Okay. Yeah.
Ish.
Maybe.
I say good intentions, but
to an extent.
You know what I mean. Yeah.
But the thing is, what I found interesting is that you say she feels really rooted in the community, and I thought, well, she's obviously quite badass, right? But the thing is that what I found interesting is also that she is also quite disparaging about some of the women that live there in the shelter, refuge, I don't know what we call it. And she's not above, using them for her own means.
Yeah.
And not really, like keeping her own counsel and not really necessarily telling them why she's making certain decisions. And she's basically just sort of, to an extent, fooling these people and trying to control them to an extent, which I found interesting. I guess, I mean, in a way, also I appreciate that, because it's not some sort of, like perfect angelic sort of goody two-shoes person. But, she's flawed and she's got her own weird obsessions.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I don't know. Yeah, I saw her more, what do you say? It's more complex than, that light went out. I saw her in a more complex way than just, she's only got good intentions. And plus, I mean, she really hates men. Really hates them. Hang on.
Sure.
Oh.
There we go. Amazing. No, actually, that's a really good point, because I think her whole, her kind of axe that she's grinding, I guess, throughout the book is kind of both the thing that really drives her, but also seems to lead to her downfall to some degree, or kind of it's the thing that also has everyone sort of backs up, right? And I think it's really, because at first I couldn't really work out where she slotted in with everything, and then I think that was kind of actually this idea of creation, particularly procreation, and kind of where that fits in. But yeah, I just thought she was such a fun addition to the cast of these characters. I just, like, even when I was just like, I don't know if I necessarily agree with some of your worldviews, I was just like, you're an entertaining character to read.
Absolutely.
Was she the one who hated the opera woman, or was that the mother?
Oh no, that's the mother.
That's the mother.
Fantastic.
Which is so well done.
That was also such a fantastic characterization moment, I thought. Because in the way she talks about this other woman, it reveals so much about her. What type of person she is and how she doesn't fit in with these other mothers.
Yes.
And I loved it. Yeah. Oh God, we're jumping around, aren't we?
No, we are, but it's all good. Because I think that's the thing. I think that
so the narrative jumps around.
Yes, exactly. But I think that the opera woman is this mother who is, and correct me if I'm wrong with this, but yeah, at one point she sort of briefly references going to an opera and like how Vienna is the place for operas, and this mother just tears her limb from limb in every single sentence from there on. And it's even, she sort of diverts, goes back to kind of her normal running, normal, I think she's shopping at one point, and then she's sort of like, well, the Viennese mother, just sort of like these really snarky bits coming in, and you're like, oh my goodness, this has rattled you. But I think that maybe does come back a little bit to what we were saying about how she's constantly feeling like she doesn't measure up in terms of being a mother. Like she's doing it imperfectly, and she is sort of feeling really guilty about not being perfect. And then these mothers sort of swan in and like, well, of course we went to the opera and Vienna's very opera. And then at one point she sort of just like really disparagingly starts talking about that Valkyrie woman, and it's just that Valkyrie or something, and it's scathing, but like that kind of level of almost unhinged hatred, I think, exactly like you said, really brings out a lot about that character. We realize how deep rooted her kind of insecurities are about her parenting skills, and kind of what she is and isn't able to provide the kids, because all of her sections are written in quite formalized, stylized language.
Yeah.
And then the fact that she doesn't feel intellectually good enough kind of almost comes across a little bit in that monologue, in a kind of in a monologue, I thought, in the sense that she almost feels like she has to speak in these high level words, but almost to retain them. Like kind of, she almost doesn't want to forget how to be an academic. And because she, at one point, I think she talks in really high level language, and then she refers to her kids asking about something really mean, like really like benign and sort of, I can't remember what it was, but you know, the kid wants to know like something about poo or something, and she's just like, you know, you can almost hear her screaming like, "I have a degree. Like, I should not be doing this, dealing with this." And so I thought it was really interesting because that's like the Valkyrie woman like really scratches something there and kind of gets under her skin.
I think it's a mix with between so the fact that she's never been able to go anywhere abroad because her husband is so close-minded.
Yeah. Yeah, that was it. I forgot about that bit.
And this woman has been able to do so, even though she's also a mother, you know. That's the one part. And then the other, I think, is just that she absolutely hates the pretentiousness of that woman, talking about her opera and what was it, the capital for operas.
Yes.
And I can completely get that, because it's one of those, you know, it's like, oh, I'm just gonna brag now here how cultured I am. And she's just like, oh my God, shoot me now, you know?
Yeah. But I love it because even when the characters are scathing, the book for me doesn't feel like it tips over into bitterness. Like it would be quite easy for it to also sound like the authorial voice was sort of saying, and these people are terrible. But it kind of almost feels like we are very clearly shown that this is this character feeling it. And actually the narrative is about laughing at how disproportionate this anger feels.
Like, yeah, maybe. I found another bit where she's also commenting on some mothers and children.
Yes.
Which I thought was hilarious as well. But I don't know if, I have it here anyway. So I don't know. Should I read it?
Yeah, please.
Oh, you want? Okay. So she's I think it's like back to school or something like that, and she just talks about the different kids and the different parents that come picking the children up. And sorry, I'm already laughing again. So here's one bit where she talks about hard on the heels of the girl with tight braids and miniature briefcase, demurely marching up towards her own spruced mother to receive another dose of middle management incentives and exhortations. It's just like brilliant. And at the end, she talks about I don't know, something. She just says one sentence, was like blah blah blah, and then without me having to undergo the unpleasantries of actually talking to any of these women. And I was like, yes. But this is the thing, though. I mean, I'm not a mother, but I can just completely understand that. It's like it sounds so terrible to be forced into this sort of small talk with random people that you've just been thrown in together with because your child happens to be of the same age as their child.
Yes. Yeah, and it's such a weird, exactly like you said, like a weird forced social interaction. But at the same time, the other mothers that she meets see it as a competition, this sort of game. And it's a game that she can't win because she has a husband who's not helping. So she's already kind of one man down. And she is kind of carrying this whole operation. And she doesn't have the same financial sort of security as some of these other mothers. And so it's really interesting that this kind of, and I could imagine how it would feel like that, you know, it kind of appears a lot in, you know, Hollywood films and whatever, right? This kind of snooty, well, my daughter is 3 and she speaks 17 languages, plays the oboe, like, is it, you know, like, is a gymnastics specialist, and you know, like it's all this kind of, they're sort of living vicariously through your children, right? They're kind of living.
It's terrible anyway.
Yeah, and so it's kind of just really entertaining to watch this woman just being like, oh, sod off, like you don't, like, you can't do this to me. But yeah, I thought that was just really fun, and I thought it was a really interesting little nugget for how it then ties with the rest of these sort of 3 female characters essentially in the book, of like how we then see parenthood, right? This kind of, or how we see kind of creation and this, you know, there's one woman sort of failing because she's not middle class enough, essentially, and because she doesn't have the same sort of support. One woman who's sort of seen in the sort of other sort of certain ways and is sort of judged, and then the kind of the basic DNA code of sort of creation. I just thought it was a really interesting, like, again, sort of like I was sort of saying right at the beginning, it shouldn't work. Those three things should not fit. So we've spoken a little bit about the two women at the heart of this book, but there is obviously this sort of third character of the genome, and as you sort of mentioned earlier, that's sort of often sort of portrayed as sort of these letters sort of speaking in sort of paragraphs each, or sometimes it's split down the page, and sometimes it's, you know, sort of chains of letters that make words, and things like that. So it's quite complicated. And I have to admit, this is the bit I struggled with the most in the book. And again, I think probably deeper reading on this probably would help in some degree. But yeah, I mean, that's sort of how I found it. I sort of saw this as kind of the theme running along in the background. Like, this was the kind of constant voice, and the two women's sort of stories sort of wove did that shape.
Wove through it.
Yeah, in and out of that kind of main sort of through line
The
of
DNA,
the DNA.
helix.
Yeah. And how actually, which is, yeah, I hadn't realized this, as I was doing that with the hand, that is the DNA structure. Who knew? That was all connected in my mind without me realizing. But yeah, how did you find the genome aspects, like the kind of the DNA code parts?
So I think so this was the part that intrigued me the most when I first heard about the novel, because I just was like, how does that work? Oh, that sounds so interesting. And so generally I really liked it, but I do think it was the most intellectually demanding part. I think it's probably, well, I don't know how you say it. So the mother also has this really refined vocabulary and stuff like that, but the genome does as well. But on top of it, I think the genome refers to a lot more sort of abstract ideas. And, you know, at one point it talks about the Judeo-Christian, how do you say this? Way of transcribing, way of writing down stories and how they are passed on and how they are transcribed then, and blah, blah, blah. And it's kind of related to DNA copying and all that sort of thing.
Right.
So, you know, there's some sort of rather, difficult, also philosophical concepts, I guess, maybe, I'm not sure. So that's where it gets difficult. What I love though is, well, I think I've said this before, this incredible irreverence of the voice. It just does not give a toss about humans. And that is just incredibly funny. But yeah, I'm sure there were quite a few things that probably went over my head there. But I also loved, I think I've said this before, I really loved trying to find Easter eggs in the base, in the order of which base talks when. Yeah. Not that I always got there, but
I think that's kind of, and it's fun that the book is kind of shaped in a way that you could kind of go away and be like, oh, I'm just kind of curious about this. I'm going to take this away and kind of try that for a bit. Because those bits sometimes went over my head, but I was like very aware that there was probably something I was missing that connected the dots somewhere else. But I really I hadn't picked up on it in the way that you said it there, but that actually makes a lot of sense. That idea that stories are replications, right? That passing on a story is a replication, but not always a perfect one. That there is going to be sort of, there's going to be sort of a slight variation each time, kind of like a sort of, there we go.
But that's where you can find allusions to that and to the difficulty and to the replication errors in the basis that I used. I think, well, that's my answer, that what I've puzzled out.
Well, actually, because I realized I hadn't noticed at the time, but when I held up the eye test part earlier, the letter U is in there as well. So actually there is a mistake in this code. Like another letter has creeped in.
There's a U.
Yeah, so like it's got all the CGATs in there, but then at one point there's a U that breaks in as well. And it was sorry.
U is the base that replaces T in the mRNA, the messenger RNA. And if you look very closely in these two columns there, at some point we also get, in the part where the two columns start, we get U's as well. I think I told you about that at some point.
Oh yeah, I think you're right. Yeah.
I think it's page 44 and 45 there's U's, and it makes, well, no, it makes perfect sense to me why the second U is there, but not the first one. And I asked Mark and he wouldn't answer me. So I'm incredibly frustrated and I feel like I've got to go back and look, figure it out, because I don't think I just need to know. This
is sort of in some ways the danger with being able to have sort of message access to the author.
Oh yeah,
is like you kind of feel like, oh my gosh, can you answer this for me?
He did. In fairness, he did answer some things, but it was just like this one, he was just like, no, I will not show my hand. I was like, okay.
I love it. So what I thought could be really fun is, because of the playfulness of this language, is almost on every page, is sort of to just do like a random flick through, stop on a page and see if you can find sort of like a creative, like a bit of language that entertains you, or like whether it's really beautifully written, whether it's a play on words, whether it's kind of something silly. Yes.
All right.
So let's go. So this is just, I think this is the mother. Hang on. Yes, this is the mother speaking, but there are a couple of bits on this page. So there's a reference to a spider, and where is this? I've just lost it again.
Which page is it?
184. Ooh. So at one point, so she talks about, so she says, here she was emerging once again, her own rhythms steeped in agitation, yoked to a vaporous umbilical. And then, because we've got this reference to a spider, coming up empty, eight-handed. So instead of like empty-handed, but then also eight-handed, because it's a spider. But then also the bit that caught my eye first, she says, cupboard love when I'm, I'll start that again. Cupboard love when I'm old Mother Hubbard. So like the kind of psychological idea of cupboard love. And then that also, linked to this idea of like, she is old Mother Hubbard with these bare cupboards that she can't feed her kids with. So I thought that was really fun. But also she's out of love, therefore, because her kids only love her when she's feeding them, and she can't feed them.
So this is a mother talking. The babe's crying, the novel's in the frame, yet it appears my journal's the one nuzzling me towards a sustained mental clinch, smirking like the cat that got the cream before the baby's even had its milk. So we're like, okay, smirking like a cat that got the cream, and then like 2/3 of a page later, the journal licked its paws clean, and then lolled over to the scratch pad for some wetting.
Right.
And then he goes on and uses that same, language from the same, how do you say it? Bubble of meaning or something.
Yes. Yeah.
Describe something different, because it's like, but first there was a mewling infant to attend to.
Right.
And I was just like, that's brilliant. And at some point he goes back to the cat metaphor a third time.
Yeah.
Let's leave it at that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of really curious about how he sort of went about writing that. That sort of was sort of fascinating to me, to kind of how you layer that into it.
Yeah.
Because like how, like, do you sort of write it and then I kind of go, actually, here's a great thing, or is that in the editing where you kind of go back and I'm really curious. We need to ask Mark about this. But yeah, no, and I think that again is a perfect summary of what I really enjoyed about this book, which is just the ability to sort of be both very intellectual and sort of poignant and kind of making a point, but also incredibly silly and lighthearted, and kind of there's almost kind of childish gleefulness of sort of just playing around with language. And I thought that was just so delightful. So I'm really glad I read this, especially because I bought it a few months ago and it would have just been one of those books that I just would take forever to come around to. So I'm really glad we buddy read this and had a chance to actually to be able to bounce thoughts off as I was going. But yeah, really interesting book.
Well, I hadn't actually had it around for that long, but I had already wanted to read it when I first heard about it, like, I don't know, maybe a year ago or two. I can't remember exactly.
Yeah.
But I've bought it, also like just a while ago, and then it was just there and it was sort of intimidating me.
Just staring out at you like, hello.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like an intimidating cat. Yeah, anyway.
This is the mewling infant of...
That's why I was like, yes, we need a buddy read. This is what's going to propel me forward. And also I can talk about whatever, you know, if I
Mhm.
didn't get something. Yeah.
Yeah,
I think it was a good one to buddy read.
I think so too. And on that note, that's been us babbling about Tree Dreams in the Key of G by Marc Nash. If you have any sort of thoughts on this book, if you've read anything by Marc Nash, including this book, we'd love to hear some of those in the comments. Particularly, it would be really interesting to kind of hear. I realize this is probably quite niche, as in we're talking about a book that you may not have read, but I hope you've at least enjoyed the discussion of sort of going through some of these themes, and we'll sort of leave a few links below about some of the books we've spoken about and some of the other bits. But yeah, you know, I'd love to hear some of your thoughts, and I hope you've at the very least enjoyed the discussion. But thank you so much for doing this with me. Thank you, lovely listeners out there. And this
If
was
you're
very
actually
surreal.
still there.
Yeah, because it's very strange doing this, I've realized, because with the normal video, you kind of stop, kind of think, at some point I'm going to edit this, but we're still having a conversation. So it was very weird to say goodbye.
Yeah.
And then be like, no. But take care, and I hope you've enjoyed it.
Bye.
Bye.